Do you know who I am? Don't you know who I am? Do you know who I am?
Yeah, we know.
I have always found Edward Richtofen to be a very interesting character. He almost single-handedly drives the story forward, but there still remains the question of why. Why does he do the things that he does? There are two versions of the character, Ultimus and Primus, which at first seem to be pretty different from one another, but are actually exactly the same. To quote Dr. Monty from Gorod Krovi, they were fragmented across a multitude of different realities, but each and every one is basically the same. Which to me means that they may have different experiences that influence their personalities, but they are still built upon the same foundation. So the different versions of this one character help us to understand him better as a whole, as we can see how he behaves in different situations. Let's start with the original Richtofen, the Ultimus version. Originally, he was just a scientist working on various projects for Group 935, such as the Wunderwaffe DG2, and he assisted Dr. Ludwig Maxis with his teleporters. But Maxis was always pretty dismissive of his work. He didn't follow through on his promise to mass-produce the DG2, and he blatantly rejected his functioning teleporter prototype. This made Richtofen resent his superior, which is a pretty normal reaction. However, things got just a little out of hand when it came to the teleporter project. As I said, Maxis had rejected his functional prototype, declaring it a waste of time, even though he himself was struggling to accomplish this. Richtofen jumped to the conclusion that Maxis was planning to steal his designs, even though there was no evidence of this. In reality, Maxis was probably just frustrated that his assistant had surpassed him, even with help from Dr. Monty, and likely never intended to plagiarize Richtofen's work. Nevertheless, Richtofen's paranoia got the best of him. Instead of ceasing development on his teleporter, he began working even harder so that he could publish his work before Maxis. He even went as far as to use himself as the first human test subject, which is pretty drastic. The extremes that Richtofen went to lead me to believe that it was about more than just improving the human condition, it was about his pride. He wanted fame and glory for his achievements, and the idea of someone possibly taking that away drove him crazy. And then he actually did go crazy. After sending himself through the teleporter, he ended up in a chamber that contained the Moon Pyramid device. Upon contact with the pyramid, voices of corruption were able to speak to him, encouraging him to harness the power of the MPD. That, plus the prolonged exposure to Element 115, degraded his mind and removed his inhibitions. He had already wanted to achieve greatness and to have revenge against Maxis, but now he was willing to go to great lengths to achieve those goals. When he returned to Group 935 19 days later, he led a group of disgruntled scientists in studying the MPD. However, he was no longer interested in scientific achievement. His sights were set on something much bigger, ruling the world, and he wasn't going to let anything stand in his way. He even resorted to having prisoners killed in order to power up the machine. When it was ready, he finally enacted his plans of revenge against Maxis, attempting to kill him and his daughter Samantha. However, things would not go according to plan, and Samantha would be the one to end up inside the MPD, granting her its power. But Richtofen wasn't going to give up. He would steal that power back from her, and for just a moment, he had exactly what he wanted. He was a god, with the power to rule the world however he saw fit. But then, Maxis would snatch it away by blowing up the Earth in an attempt to sever his connection to the ether. He was not entirely successful, however, and Richtofen was still able to terrorize what remained of humanity for years. He tried to have the Victus crew re-establish his connection to the ether, but he was unable to convince them. Instead, they gave Maxis power over the ether, and he would use that power to trap Richtofen in a zombified body. From there, all he could really do was help his Primus counterpart in getting the Victus crew to his Alcatraz lab, and afterwards was left alone on the lifeless planet. Later on, during the events of Black Ops 4, we see that he and Primus Nikolai were the last two alive at the campfire. Since he was the one with the connection to Samuel Stuhlinger, Nikolai needed his help, but there was no way that Richtofen would have done it without something in return. The way Nikolai said that he was sorry before killing Richtofen suggests that he probably did offer him something, probably power or maybe just the opportunity to live. Whatever may have happened, Richtofen was clearly not expecting to die there, and it looked like he tried to fight back before being shot. This version of Edward Richtofen shows us that he is a person that desires to be praised and worshipped. At first, he wanted to earn recognition through scientific achievements, maybe even earn a Nobel Prize, but his efforts did not yield the results that he was expecting, which pushed him down a much darker path, one where he would use very evil methods to seek out much greater power. Then there's the Primus version. Like Ultimus, this Richtofen also started off as a simple scientist, but he was not turned evil by the forces around him. Instead, he found himself playing an important role in a much larger conflict. Primus Richtofen would go on to find the Chronorium, a magic book that tells the reader whatever they need to know. This book instructed Richtofen on how to continue the cycle, save the universe, and most importantly, how to avoid death. He gathered up his World War I buddies, and together they sacrificed their souls in order to stop the Apothicons from taking over all of creation. But it wouldn't stop there. Richtofen and his group were supposed to be erased from existence after defeating the Apothicons, but he wasn't going to let a god decide his fate. Instead, he devised a complex paradox that saved him and the other three from being deleted. In order to resolve this paradox, Dr. Monty sent them back in time to be the heroes of the Great War, continuing the cycle. Throughout his journey, Richtofen was always very secretive, portraying himself as being burdened with knowledge that the others couldn't handle. At one point, he even tells Nikolai that the reason he doesn't let him read the Chronorium is because he wouldn't understand it. This, ironically, was on Blood of the Dead, the map where Nikolai would read it anyway. So if Nikolai and presumably the others were capable of reading the Chronorium, why did he keep everything secret? I think it's because Richtofen wanted to be the one that the others looked to for guidance, the one with a plan, the hero of the story, even if it wasn't true. Had he filled them in on what was going on, they would have become his equals instead of his followers. At the end of Der Eisendrache, he says, we will complete our mission, which is very telling of how he feels about the other three. At first, he wanted to say that he himself would be the one to finish the mission, as if it's his journey and the others were just his sidekicks, before correcting himself to include them in his statement. That's not to say that he didn't care about them, though. I mean, he didn't at first, he wasn't even planning on saving them, but he starts to like them more and more as their journey goes on. Richtofen may think he's better than everyone else, but he's not entirely heartless. Additionally, why did the Chronorium have Richtofen continue the cycle instead of ending it? As we saw in Black Ops 4, resolving the paradox was pretty simple. They just needed the summoning key, the Agarthan device, and a soul. I think it's because Richtofen would not have been willing to do it. Resolving the paradox would not have been very glamorous, nobody would have ever known what happened, and he wouldn't have even gotten to survive. But by continuing the cycle and fighting in the Great War, Richtofen got to go down in history as a hero. But after the Great War, Richtofen must have come to some kind of revelation that what he had done was wrong. Dr. Monty was evil all along, and he had given him exactly what he wanted, but it was too late to do anything about it. So, as instructed by the Chronorium, he went back to his lab in Alcatraz and entered cryogenic sleep, hoping that the next cycle would be the one to break and wake him back up. He always knew that he would have to do this. In a conversation with Stuhlinger, he mentions that he knows how scary it is thinking he's going to be stuck in a box with his own thoughts forever. I just don't think he knew why he would have to do it until the time came. And then, eventually, the cycle did break, leaving the Primus crew stuck in Alcatraz. Blood of the Dead may be a controversial map, but it is an excellent character study of the 4 members of the Primus crew, especially Richtofen. The future has changed, but he spends the entirety of the map refusing to accept that. He desperately tries to reassure his teammates that everything was under control, but there was ultimately nothing he could do to change the fact that he would not be getting out of there. Richtofen had always said that he was doing the right thing, but he had never actually done that. Not until the end of Blood of the Dead, when he sacrificed himself in the dark mechanism to free the others. But he still asks, "What have I done?" as if he regrets it, because the reality of the situation is finally setting in. It's over for him. He's then confronted by his post-war self, who had just woken up from cryosleep. He states that he won't be saving him, and that he's not even sorry about it, which suggests that he hates himself for what he had done. Richtofen tries to convince his other self that he's too important to die, but it doesn't work because this Richtofen knows that he's not important at all. Then he gets honest. "I wanted to be me, the one who did all the hard work. I wanted to keep going," he says. He wasn't ready to stop. He wanted to finish the cycle and be a hero, and I'm sure he was even hoping to be the version of himself that wakes up from cryosleep. But he was one cycle too late, and now he won't get to accomplish anything that he had worked so hard for. His last words are, "I was the nicest one, and you won't even remember." Which is true. He was the nicest one. He was the first Richtofen to do something altruistic. But he won't be remembered. Of course, everyone and everything will soon be gone, which he may or may not know, but what's more likely is that he doesn't feel like he's done anything memorable yet. He didn't get to finish his plan, and the others will never know what it was that they were working towards. This then leaves us with the post-war version of Primus Richtofen. who joined the group when Nikolai took over. We don't get to see much of him, so it's hard to say anything for certain, but he clearly disliked his younger self. This is the one that got to see Monty's evil side after the Great War, so he probably felt very foolish about continuing the cycle. He becomes pretty morose towards the ending, probably knowing that his grand adventure is over, but I imagine he was expecting something more like retirement, where he would get what he really wanted, and not to die there. So like his Ultimus variant, Primus Richtofen also desired to be worshipped, but he wasn't trying to rule over everyone like Ultimus. Instead, he was trying to get everyone to look up to him as their savior. He really did believe that he was securing a better tomorrow, but he wasn't. He was basically using a multi-dimensional conflict to play out his fantasies. He was always in a position to properly save the universe, but he wouldn't have done it. So the Chronorium sent him on this big adventure through time and space that gave him exactly what he wanted, but was always designed to fail in such a way so that Nikolai could take over and do what was necessary. And the funny thing is, when Nikolai took command, he became the person that Richtofen always wanted to be. He made actual sacrifices, his actions would actually accomplish something, and the knowledge that he was burdened with actually needed to be kept from the others. Remember that Monty quote in the beginning? The one about each version of these characters being the same? Well, that quote continues on with the description of the four main characters, and Richtofen's was interesting. Monty called him the man-child, broken and twisted by a life burdened with knowledge, living like a soul who is perpetually drowning. Both versions of Richtofen fit this description. Their ambitions are very childlike, basically wanting to be the most popular kid around. At first, being a great scientist was enough, but then they discovered what else was out there. One chose to obtain power and be feared by all, and the other chose to save the universe and be idolized for the rest of time. But like someone who is constantly drowning, Richtofen was always fighting a battle that he could never win. Ultimus never got to have the power he wanted, no matter how close he got, and Primus would never get to feel like a hero. Every time he got to the end of the cycle, he would realize how much damage his actions had caused. And so, knowing what we do about these two versions, we can make some assumptions about the third version of Edward Richtofen. This one is the pure version of Richtofen. He, along with Samantha Maxis, lived together in Dr. Monty's house, and later were allowed to survive in the new timeline after Nikolai's purge. He seemingly lived a pretty normal life, having been a pilot and starting a family. However, he lost that family due to the actions of Maxis and Weaver, which likely started him down a dark path. He still has memories from the original timeline, which is likely why he went to work for the Office of Extra-Regular Activities, and later created Requiem to study the Dark Ether. But he was still up to something. As the director of Requiem, he manipulated events in order to trap Samantha in the Dark Ether and capture the Forsaken so that he can enact something called Project Janus, going as far as to kill, torture, and imprison his own people to achieve these goals. We don't know what his endgame is yet, but we can assume that he seeks some kind of greater power. It could be that he wants the Dark Ether's power for himself to rule over the world that hurt him, like his Ultimus version. Or maybe he helped the Forsaken escape the Dark Ether so that he could be the one to save the world from it, kind of like his Primus version. Or it's possible that he can't accept losing his son and is willing to risk everything to get him back. Right now there's no way to know what he's planning, but one thing's for sure, he can't win. No matter how close he may come, he will never truly accomplish his goals. Those are my thoughts on Dr. Edward Richtofen. I think I've got a pretty good understanding of him, but he is a pretty complex character that's been getting developed since 2009, so if I got anything wrong, or if there's more to add to the conversation, go ahead and let me know.